But the paper. You told me the paper was just for the garden party permit, David. The words left my lips as a whisper, a fragile thing in a room suddenly too loud with silence. The half-eaten slice of lemon cake sat on a porcelain plate in my trembling hand. Just moments before, the air had been thick with perfume, with the sound of champagne glasses clinking, and with the false, bright laughter of my son, David, and his wife, Veronica. Now the only sound was the rustle of official documents in the hands of a stranger standing in my doorway, his face a mask of professional pity. The festive banner hanging over the fireplace, crookedly spelling out, "We love you, Mary," seemed to mock me, its cheerful colors turning sinister. David wouldn't look at me. He was intensely studying a scuff mark on his Italian leather shoe, his jaw tight. But Veronica met my gaze, and in her eyes I saw not a flicker of remorse, only the cold, hard glint of victory. Ah, my dear ones, before we travel back down this painful path, before we uncover how a son could gift his mother such a beautifully wrapped box of cruelty, I ask for a small kindness. If you find a place in your heart for these memories of mine, please take a moment to press that little like button. It helps these old stories find new ears, and if you have not already, perhaps subscribe to my little corner of the world. It would warm my heart to know you are there, and please tell me in the comments which city or town you are listening from. It makes the world feel a little smaller, a little less lonely, to know where my words are landing. Now, let us begin. Let us see how the seeds of this betrayal were sown. It started, as the most terrible things often do, with a beautiful idea. The spring had been particularly kind that year. The roses in the garden, the same ones my dear Arthur had planted for me decades ago, were bursting with a defiant crimson life. I was spending my afternoons on the porch, a wool shawl over my knees, when David and Veronica arrived one Tuesday, their arms laden with groceries and a smile that, in hindsight, was far too bright. "Mother," David said, kissing my cheek. His cologne was sharp, smelling of money and ambition. "We were thinking, you do so much for everyone, for the whole family. You're the glue, the foundation." Veronica, placing a carton of my favorite orange juice on the kitchen counter, chimed in, "Absolutely, and we feel we never celebrate you enough, so we want to throw you a party, a matriarch appreciation party right here in your beautiful home." The idea warmed me. It had been a long time since the house had been filled with true, uncomplicated joy. The thought of seeing all the children, even the difficult ones like Eleanor and Samuel, and the grandchildren, like sweet Emily and the ever-watchful Charlotte, all under one roof. It was a balm to my old heart. "Oh, that is a lovely thought, my dears," I said, my voice thick with emotion. They spent the next hour fluttering around me, making plans. They would handle everything. The catering, the invitations, the decorations. All I had to do was sit back and feel loved. They painted a picture so idyllic, so filled with the promise of familial harmony, that I ignored the small, cold stone of doubt in my gut. It was a feeling I had learned to recognize over the years, a quiet alarm that often rang when Veronica was being particularly sweet. It was the same feeling I'd had years ago, when she'd helped me sort through Arthur's old financial papers, an event that was followed by my son Samuel complaining that his inheritance trust seemed lighter than expected. But I hushed that little voice. This was for me. This was David, my son, wanting to celebrate his mother. To doubt him felt like a sin. The day before the party, the house was a whirlwind of activity. The smell of floor polish and fresh lilies filled the air. David arrived in the afternoon looking flustered, a sheaf of papers in his hand. "Mother, thank goodness you're here," he said, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. A bit of last-minute bureaucracy. "Can you believe it? I was arranging a bouquet of my roses in my favorite crystal vase." "What is it, dear?" "The city," he sighed, rolling his eyes with theatrical frustration. "For a party this size, with music in the garden, we need a special permit. It's ridiculous, but Veronica is a stickler for the rules. They need your signature as the homeowner. It's just a formality to say you approve." He spread a single sheet of paper on the polished dining room table, a table that had seen 1,000 family meals. 1,000 arguments, 1,000 moments of grace. He strategically placed his thumb over the dense block of text at the top. "Just sign here, on the bottom line," he said, handing me a heavy, expensive-looking pen. It was Veronica's. I recognized its silver gleam. "I have to rush this back to the clerk's office before they close." I looked at the paper. It was filled with the kind of legal jargon that makes an old woman's eyes swim. I saw words like heretofore and whereas. All I could clearly make out was the line at the bottom, marked with a small X. I felt a flicker of my old self, the shrewd woman who had managed a household and helped Arthur run his business. The woman who always read the fine print. The dilemma of a matriarch. Do you intervene, showing your distrust and potentially causing a fight? Or do you remain silent, choosing peace and faith in your child? I looked up at David's face. He looked tired, stressed from all the effort he was putting into my party. How could I question him? How could I insult his grand gesture with suspicion? Of course, dear, I said, my voice softer than I intended. I took the pen. The metal was cold against my fingers, and with a heart full of love and gratitude for my son, I signed my name. I signed away everything. The moment he left, the house felt unnaturally quiet. David took the signed paper and was gone in a gust of hurried apologies, leaving behind only the scent of his expensive cologne and the heavy silver pen on the table. I picked it up. It was cold and weighty, an instrument of such casual elegance. For a fleeting second, I had the strangest urge to throw it against the wall, to watch it shatter. I didn't know why. I placed it gently in a drawer instead, beside a bundle of my late Arthur's letters tied with a faded ribbon. A tool of betrayal lying next to a treasure of devotion. The irony is only clear now in the rearview mirror of memory. The day of the party arrived, painted in hues of gold and sapphire by a perfect spring sky. My home, which had felt so quiet just the day before, was transformed. A string quartet I didn't hire was playing softly in the corner of the living room, their music a silken thread weaving through the growing chatter. The air, which usually smelled of my cinnamon and baked bread, was now thick with the foreign, albeit delicious aromas from a catering company. David and Veronica had insisted, "No, Mother, you won't lift a finger. This is your day." It was a lovely sentiment, but it made me feel like a guest in my own life. I sat in my usual armchair, a stranger at my own celebration. My children and grandchildren began to arrive, each one a different chapter of my heart's story. Benjamin, my gentle artist, was the first. He knelt before my chair and handed me a small, clumsily wrapped package. Inside was a miniature watercolor of the rose garden, so vivid I could almost smell the blossoms. "I saw the light hitting the petals this morning and thought of you, Mama," he said, his eyes full of a sincerity that David's had lacked. He was a balm to my soul, my Benjamin. Then came Eleanor, my eldest, a storm of efficiency and a sensible blazer. She kissed the air near my cheek before immediately beginning to rearrange the appetizer trays. "Honestly, these caterers have no concept of traffic flow," she muttered, moving a platter of shrimp cocktails. Her controlling nature used to grate on me, a constant reminder that she thought I was no longer capable. But that day I felt a strange comfort in it. It was familiar. It was her. My loyal Jessica, Benjamin's wife, came and sat on the ottoman at my feet, taking my hand in her warm, capable ones. "Mary, are you all right? This is all a bit much, isn't it?" she asked, her gaze sweeping over the crowd, the caterers, the musicians. She saw what I felt, that this party in its grandness was erasing the very essence of the home it was meant to celebrate. I squeezed her hand, a silent thank you for understanding. I watched as David and Veronica played the perfect hosts, their laughter the loudest in the room. They moved through the crowd like seasoned politicians, accepting praise for their thoughtfulness, their generosity. "It was the least we could do for a woman like Mary," I heard David say to a cousin. "She deserves the world." My heart swelled with a foolish, painful pride. But as the afternoon wore on, I noticed things. Small cracks in the beautiful facade. I saw David by the champagne fountain, his glass never quite empty. I saw him check his watch 3 times in less than 10 minutes. And I noticed how his eyes would dart towards the front door whenever a new guest arrived, a flicker of, not anticipation, but anxiety. Then I saw Veronica speaking in a hushed, intense tone to a man I didn't recognize. He was not family. He wore a severe dark suit that was out of place amongst the cheerful pastels of the party guests. He had the cold, impartial eyes of a hawk, and he held a leather briefcase. I remembered, with a sudden, jarring clarity, seeing her in a similar conversation years ago, with a similarly suited man, just before Samuel's inheritance troubles began. I had chosen to believe her explanation then, a simple financial advisor, she had said. Now, seeing it again, that old cold stone of doubt in my gut began to grow heavy. I tried to catch her eye, but she turned away, leading the man to a quiet corner of the garden. The peak of the performance came an hour later. David tapped a knife against his champagne glass, calling for silence. The quartet quieted. The chatter died down. Every eye in the room turned to him as he stood beside the fireplace, one arm draped possessively around Veronica's waist. "Friends, family," he began, his voice smooth and practiced. "We are here today to honor the heart of our family, my mother, Mary." A wave of warm applause filled the room. I felt tears welling in my eyes. For years this house has been our anchor, and she has been our captain. She has given everything for us. Now, as she enters her golden years, it is our turn to give back to her. He raised his glass. We wanted to ensure her future, to take any burdens off her shoulders, to make certain that she has absolute peace of mind, knowing that the legacy she and my father built is secure, and that her wishes for the family's future are solidified, legally. The word hung in the air, legally. It sounded so cold, so final. But the family, caught in the warmth of the champagne and the sentiment, beamed. They applauded his beautiful words, his devotion. And I, a foolish old woman, cried tears of gratitude. I thought he was talking about love, about family. He was talking about property. He finished his speech with a flourish. "So let's raise a glass to Mother Mary. May her future be as bright as the love she's given us." The toast echoed through the room. "To Mary!" As people drank, Veronica leaned over to the caterer and whispered, "Bring out the cake now." There was an urgency in her voice, a sense of a final act being rushed to its conclusion. The cake was a masterpiece, a 3-tiered confection of lemon and cream, topped with spun sugar roses. As the guests sang their praise, the grand, sonorous chime of the doorbell cut through the air. It was not the gentle ring of a late-coming guest. It was a firm, official, 2-toned sound that demanded to be answered. The music stopped. The laughter faltered. I saw David's face pale. He looked at Veronica. She met his gaze, and in that silent, infinitesimal exchange, something passed between them. It was not love or reassurance. It was confirmation. She gave him the slightest of nods. The performance was over. A home holds the echoes of every moment lived within its walls. That day my home held its breath. Every guest, every family member stood frozen. The melody from the string quartet had died mid-note. David walked to the door as if wading through thick, invisible molasses. Veronica, however, stood perfectly still, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She was not surprised. She was expectant. David opened the door. Standing on my porch were 2 men. One was the hawk-eyed man in the dark suit I had seen with Veronica in the garden. The other was larger, a man whose sheer presence seemed to take up all the air, his face grim and official. "We are looking for Mary," the man in the suit said, his voice devoid of warmth or emotion. He did not ask. It was a statement. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes turn to me. I took a half-step forward, the silver cake knife still in my hand. "I am Mary," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "I am Mr. Albright, legal counsel," he said, holding up the leather briefcase. "And this is an officer of the court. We are here to serve these papers." He opened the briefcase with 2 sharp clicks that echoed in the silent room. He produced a thick document, an official seal gleaming at the top. "This is a copy of the fully executed and notarized deed of transfer for this property. And this," he said, handing a second, simpler document to the officer, "is the official notice to vacate the premises." The words didn't make sense. They were alien, a language from another world. Deed of transfer. Vacate the premises. It was Eleanor, my pragmatic Eleanor, who broke the spell. She marched to the doorway, snatching the papers from the lawyer's hand. "This is utterly ridiculous," she snapped. "There has been a clerical error. My mother would never—" Her voice trailed off as her eyes scanned the top page. Her face, usually so stern and composed, slackened with disbelief. Her skin turned the color of ash. "The signature is valid," Mr. Albright said coolly. "It was witnessed and notarized yesterday afternoon." "Everything is in order?" Every head turned back to me. In their eyes I saw a dozen questions. Confusion, pity, accusation. My mind, a frantic, terrified bird, flew back through the fog of the last 24 hours. "The party preparations." David's flustered arrival. "The heavy silver pen. Just a formality, Mother." For the garden party permit, my gaze found my son. David was no longer looking at his shoes. He was looking at me, his face a canvas of pure, wretched guilt. And I knew. In that devastating moment, the beautiful lie crumbled, and the monstrous truth was laid bare. The cake knife slipped from my fingers and clattered onto the polished hardwood floor. The sound was like a gunshot. That's when I spoke the words I shared with you at the beginning. The words that began this memory. They were not angry, not loud. They were the sound of a heart breaking. But the paper. You told me the paper was just for the garden party permit, David. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a heavy, suffocating blanket that smothered every last ember of joy in the room. In that silence, my son's guilt was his confession. The laughter of the party had officially turned to dust. Benjamin was the first to move. A strangled roar of fury ripped from his throat. What did you do? He lunged across the room at David, his gentle artist's hands curled into fists. It was Samuel, my envious, complicated Samuel, who surprised me by grabbing Benjamin, holding him back. Not now, Ben, not like this, Samuel grunted, his own face pale with shock. Eleanor was still staring at the document, her voice trembling with a rage I had not heard in years. It's worse, she whispered, her words cutting through the tension. Oh God, it's worse. He didn't just sign it over to himself. The deed has been transferred to a corporation, of which the sole director is Veronica. Every eye now shifted to her. My daughter-in-law, standing there radiant in her silk dress, finally dropped the pretense of a smile. Her expression was one of pure, unadulterated triumph. She had won. She had taken my queen, my castle, my entire board. The party dissolved into chaos. Guests, horrified to be witnesses to such a grotesque family drama, began to murmur their excuses, slipping out the back door into the garden, their faces a mixture of pity and morbid fascination. The beautiful celebration became a hasty, shameful evacuation. My granddaughter Emily, her face streaked with tears, rushed to my side, wrapping her thin arms around me. But I felt nothing. I was a hollowed-out thing, a stone statue in the middle of a shipwreck. Through it all, David said nothing. He simply stood there, cornered and broken by his own treachery, a puppet whose strings had been cut. Finally, Veronica spoke. Her voice was as crisp and cold as the champagne she'd been serving. Well, I think that's everything, she said to Mr. Albright, ignoring the rest of us entirely. Then she turned her gaze on me, her eyes sweeping over my home, her home, with an air of ownership. The notice gives you 30 days to remove your personal effects. Try to be punctual, 30 days. 3 decades of memories, a lifetime of love, reduced to an eviction notice served with lemon cake. Mr. Albright and the officer left. The front door clicked shut, sealing my fate. The remaining family stood in stunned silence, and I just looked at the beautiful, untouched cake, a monument to the party that had cost me everything. And I finally understood. The party wasn't for me. It was me. I was the celebration, the slaughter of a fatted calf, blissfully unaware of the knife. The silence that followed Veronica's decree was of a different kind. It was not the silence of shock, but the silence of a tomb. The party was over. The guests were gone. All that remained was the wreckage, both of the celebration and of our family. Half-empty glasses sweat onto polished wood surfaces. A single sad balloon drifted near the ceiling. And the cake, my beautiful, cruel cake, sat untouched, a monument to the lie. Eleanor was the first to find her voice, and it was a weapon. She dropped the papers onto a table and turned on David, her face a mask of cold fury. "Explain yourself," she commanded. It wasn't a question. It was an order. Right now, how could you do this? Are you in debt, is that it? Did she blackmail you? There has to be a reason that isn't pure evil. She was searching, my Eleanor, for a logical peg on which to hang this monstrous act, because a world where a son could do this to his mother for no reason was a world too chaotic for her to comprehend. David flinched, opening his mouth, but no sound came out. It was Veronica who answered, stepping in front of him, shielding him like a prized possession. "Reason," she said with a laugh that had no humor in it. "Of course there's a reason. The reason is that I am not content to sit around for 20 years waiting for a pittance of an inheritance, while Mary pours her money into Benjamin's artistic career and pays for Emily's second college degree." Her eyes swept over us, full of a venom that had clearly been brewing for years. "David is too soft. He has your sentimentality," she sneered at me. "He sees a house. I see a multi-million-dollar asset in a developing neighborhood. You were sitting on a golden nest egg, Mary, and you were letting it rot. I simply expedited the transfer of assets. This isn't an asset, it's our home, Benjamin roared, his voice cracking with anguish. It was your home, Veronica corrected him, her voice like ice. Now it is my financial security. And David's. She finally turned and looked at her husband, her expression softening into something proprietary. Darling, she said, her tone suddenly sweet, as if they were alone. It's time to go. We've done what we came here to do. This was the moment. The true test. The house was already lost. But in that second, my son's soul hung in the balance. He had a choice. He could stay, face the family he had shattered, and begin the impossible work of atonement. Or he could leave with her. He looked at me. His eyes, the same eyes that had looked up at me from his cradle, were swimming with a toxic cocktail of shame, fear, and a desperate, pleading grief. He was begging me, I think, to forgive him, to save him. But I was frozen. The woman he had just rendered homeless and heartbroken could not also be his savior. I had nothing left to give. The silence stretched. He looked from my face to Benjamin's rage, to Eleanor's disgust, and then back to Veronica's cool, expectant smile. He chose the smile. He chose the escape. Without another word, David turned his back on me, on his siblings, on the wreckage of his childhood home, and followed his wife out the door. The sound of it closing behind them was more final than a coffin lid shutting. He had not only stolen my house, he had abandoned his place in our family. The schism was complete. For a long time, nobody moved. We just stood in the ruins. Then, slowly, the family began to stir, each reacting in their own way. Eleanor, ever the general, was already on her phone, her back ramrod straight. "Richard, it's Eleanor," she said into the receiver. "Cancel my afternoon. We have a crisis. Fraud. Undue influence on an elderly parent. I need you to file an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning. This will not stand." She was already at war, building fortifications out of legal terms. Benjamin, his rage having collapsed into a deep, shuddering sorrow, came to me and knelt, taking my cold hands in his. "Mama," he whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Mama, I'm so sorry. I should have seen this." We all should have seen it. Jessica was already in motion, a whirlwind of quiet competence. She began gathering the discarded plates and glasses with a grim determination, as if clearing away the debris of the lie could somehow lessen the pain. She was trying to restore order to a world that no longer had any. I heard their voices, I felt their hands, but I was not entirely there. My soul had untethered and was drifting through the rooms collecting ghosts. I saw Arthur clear as day, sitting in his armchair by the fire reading the newspaper. I heard the phantom echo of my children's feet thundering down the staircase on Christmas morning. I smelled the scent of a long-forgotten birthday cake. I was experiencing the loss of my home all at once, an avalanche of 50 years of memory. "She can't stay here tonight," Jessica said firmly to Eleanor. "It's not right." "She's right," Benjamin agreed, looking up at me. "Mama, you'll come home with us. We'll take care of you." And there it was, the dilemma I had feared for a decade. The transition from matriarch to dependent, from the giver of comfort to the one who needed to be cared for. I was going to be a burden. It was a pain almost as sharp as the betrayal itself. I allowed them to lead me toward the door, my feet feeling like lead. My eyes fell on the mantelpiece, on the rows of framed photographs that told the story of our lives. On instinct, I reached out and took one. It was a small, faded picture of all 5 of my children as youngsters, sitting on the porch steps in the summer sun. David, a gap-toothed boy of 7, had his arm thrown protectively around a tiny Benjamin. Clutching the photograph, I let them guide me out into the cool evening air. As I crossed the threshold, my eyes caught on the banner still hanging in the living room. "We love you, Mary," it proclaimed in cheerful, mocking letters. The greatest lie of all hung in the center of the greatest truth of my life, the home that was no longer mine. The drive to Benjamin and Jessica's house was a blur. I remember the streetlights sliding across the car window, painting fleeting stripes of light and shadow across my folded hands. I clutched the small framed photograph so tightly my knuckles were white. It was the only piece of my home I had taken with me, a tiny lifeboat in an ocean of loss. The car was quiet, save for Benjamin's occasional choked sob. Each sound was a testament to his good heart, and each one made my own grief feel heavier. He was feeling my pain, and a mother is never supposed to be the source of her child's suffering. Their home was lovely. It was filled with Benjamin's art, with the scent of turpentine and Jessica's lavender potpourri. It was a place of peace, of gentle, creative warmth, and in every corner I felt like an intruder. Jessica led me to their guest room, a beautiful little space with floral wallpaper and a soft quilted bed. She had already turned down the covers and placed a glass of water on the bedside table. "Get some rest, Mary," she said, her voice a soft caress. "We'll sort everything out in the morning, but sleep is a country I could not enter." I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress too soft, the silence too new. For 50 years I had fallen asleep to the familiar groans and sighs of my own house. I knew its language, the sound of the pipes settling, the creak of the third step on the staircase, the whisper of the wind through the old oak tree outside my window. This new silence was empty. It was the silence of exile. My matriarchal dilemma, the one I had feared for so long, was now my reality. Independence versus the burden. I had spent my life as the hub of the wheel, the one everyone came home to. Now I was a spoke that had broken off, taken into another's home for repair. I listened to the muffled sounds of Benjamin and Jessica trying to live their lives around the black hole of my grief that had just opened in their living room. I heard them whispering on the phone, likely to Eleanor, updating her. I was a problem to be managed, a situation to be handled. The love behind their actions was immense, I knew that. But love does not change the fact that a queen without her castle is simply an old woman in a borrowed room. Hours later, there was a gentle knock on the door. It was Benjamin. His eyes were red-rimmed, his face etched with a pain that mirrored my own. He held 2 mugs of chamomile tea. "Couldn't sleep either," he murmured, handing one to me. He sat not on the bed but on the floor, leaning against the wall, as if to make himself smaller, less intrusive in my grief. We sat like that for a long time, sipping the tea, the silence now companionable rather than empty. "I keep seeing his face, Mama," he finally said, his voice raw. When he walked out that door, it was like I didn't even know him. "He was afraid," I said. The words surprised me. I hadn't known what I thought until I said them. A guilty conscience makes a man a coward. And Veronica, she is very good at leading cowards. I looked down at the photograph in my lap. The 5 small children on the sunny porch steps. I pointed a trembling finger at the gap-toothed boy with his arm around his little brother. "That little boy," I said, my voice catching. "That little David." He was terrified of thunderstorms. He would crawl into my bed and hide his head under the covers, and he wouldn't come out until I promised him I had told the storm to go away. He believed I could. He believed I could control the weather. A single tear dripped onto the glass of the photo frame, distorting the small, smiling face. Somewhere, inside that man who walked out my door today, that little boy is still hiding. And tonight, he must feel like the storm is right inside his own bed. I was using a memory to try and find peace, to try and make sense of the senseless. Benjamin just shook his head. "That little boy is gone, Mama, or he never would have let this happen." He was right, of course. My Grace was struggling against the hard reality of justice. What is the proper way to mourn a son who is not dead, but has simply chosen to become a monster? The next day, the War Council convened. Eleanor arrived, all business, her laptop under her arm. Samuel came too, his face grim and conflicted. We sat around Benjamin's dining table, the watercolor paintings on the walls, a vibrant, cheerful backdrop to our grim conversation. Eleanor laid it all out. "Richard, my lawyer, is confident. This is a textbook case of presumptive undue influence. David acted as her fiduciary, he procured the documents, the transaction was done in secret, and the outcome is grossly disadvantageous to her. And the fact that the property went to his wife, not even him, makes it look even more like a calculated predatory act. We file the injunction on Monday to stop Veronica from selling or borrowing against the house. Then we file a suit to have the deed transfer nullified. It sounded so simple when she said it. A clear path, a fight we could win. And David?" Samuel asked, his voice low. He, more than anyone, had felt the sting of David and Veronica's ambition before. I saw a strange mix of vindication and familial pain in his eyes. "We'll have to depose him," Eleanor said, her voice cold. "He'll have to testify under oath about how he lied to his own mother to make her sign away her home. The shame of it alone will be immense." The thought made me feel sick. The image of my son, squirming under the harsh lights of a lawyer's office, being forced to recount his betrayal word by word. Was that justice? Or was it just another form of destruction? My family was already shattered. Would grinding the shards into dust make us whole again? The dilemma of grace versus justice was no longer a philosophical exercise. It was sitting at the table with us, demanding an answer. The children were all looking at me, waiting. They would not go to war without their queen's permission. I looked from Eleanor's determined face to Benjamin's wounded one, to Samuel's conflicted gaze. They wanted to fight for me. They wanted to reclaim my home, my honor. But I knew the cost of such a war. It would be fought with money we barely had, and it would drain what little emotional strength we had left. It would dominate our lives for months, perhaps years. It would cement the hatred between brothers and turn our family name into a sordid legal case file. And what would be the prize at the end? A house full of ghosts, won back through a battle that would create 1,000 more? Mama, Benjamin prompted gently. What do you want to do? I looked down at my hands, at the wrinkled skin and the prominent veins that had spent a lifetime working for these very children. I had bandaged their knees, I had signed their report cards, and I had signed away my home. My hands were tired. My heart was tired. I need to think, I whispered. Before we declare a war, I need to be sure there is anything left worth fighting for. The days that followed were a strange, formless fog. I existed in the quiet love of Benjamin and Jessica's home, a cherished ghost at their table. I would help Jessica weed the garden, my hands finding a familiar comfort in the soil, but my mind was miles away, wandering through the silent rooms of my own house. Every morning I would wake up with a moment of pure, unthinking panic, my heart clenching at the unfamiliar pattern of light on the ceiling, before memory rushed in and I would have to lose my home all over again. Eleanor, true to her nature, did not allow the fog to settle. She was a relentless, clarifying wind. She called every morning. Mother, have you thought about it? Richard says the sooner we file, the stronger our position. She would email me articles about similar cases, highlighting legal precedents in yellow. To her, this was a problem with a clear solution, a battle with a defined strategy. My inaction was, in her eyes, a kind of weakness, a sentimental failing that was putting our victory at risk. I understood her urgency. She was trying to build a fortress around me, but she was using bricks and mortar when my wounds were not of the flesh. Benjamin, on the other hand, became my quiet shadow. He would sit with me for hours, saying nothing, simply being present. He brought me sketchbooks, not to draw in, but to feel the texture of the paper. He understood that my battle was not one that could be fought in a courtroom. It was being waged in the quiet, desolate chambers of my own heart. The turning point came on a Tuesday, a week after the party. I was sitting by the window, watching a mother in the park across the street push her small son on a swing. The boy, no older than 5, would shout with glee as he flew higher, his complete and utter faith in his mother's hands absolute. He knew she would not let him fall. That simple, sacred trust between a parent and child. It was the foundation of the world. And it was the foundation David had dynamited. Watching them, I realized Eleanor's plan, as logical as it was wrong. A lawsuit was Veronica's game. It was a war fought with sharp, unfeeling words like litigation and deposition, a battle over assets and property values. Veronica would thrive in that world of cold calculation. She would see it as a business transaction, and she would be a formidable opponent. To fight her on her own terms was to concede that she was right, that my home was nothing more than a multi-million-dollar asset. But it was never about the asset. It was about the trust. It was about the little boy on the swing. To win the house back but lose my son's soul entirely, that was no victory at all. I was the queen on my own chessboard, as I've told you. And a good queen does not charge head first into the enemy's strongest flank. She makes a move the opponent never sees coming. That evening I called another family meeting. Eleanor arrived with a file folder, Samuel with a grim sense of duty, and Benjamin and Jessica with worried eyes. They sat around the table, their faces expectant. I have made a decision, I said, my voice clearer and stronger than it had been in a week. Eleanor leaned forward, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. Good. I'll call Richard and tell him to proceed. No, I said calmly. We will not be calling the lawyers. We are not filing a suit. The silence was deafening. Eleanor looked as if I had slapped her. What? She finally gasped. Mother, that is insane. That is surrender. You are handing that viper everything she wants on a silver platter. Am I? I asked, meeting her gaze. What Veronica wants is a fight. She wants to see us bankrupt ourselves in legal fees, to drag our family name through the mud. She wants to watch us tear ourselves apart fighting for bricks and mortar. That is her victory. I will not give it to her. So we do nothing? Samuel asked, his brow furrowed. We just let them have it. We do not do nothing, I said. We simply choose a different battlefield and a different weapon. I took a deep breath. I am going to write a letter to David. Eleanor threw her hands up in exasperation. A letter, a letter? Mother, this is not a schoolyard squabble. She stole your life savings. We need a judge, not a postman. Please, I said, raising a hand. Hear me out. This will not be an angry letter. It will not be a letter of begging. It will be a letter of memory. I will remind him of the boy who was afraid of thunderstorms. I will remind him of the winter he had pneumonia. And I sat by his bed for 3 nights straight, wiping his brow with a cool cloth. I will remind him of the day he graduated, the pride in his father's eyes. I will remind him of every brick of love and sacrifice that built the foundation of the house he so easily signed away. I looked around the table at my children. This legal battle. David is a coward. Veronica will fight it, and he will hide behind her skirts. I want to speak to him directly, without her there to twist the words. A lawsuit is about justice for the past. This letter, this is a fight for what little might be left of his future. For his soul. Benjamin's eyes were filled with tears, but he nodded slowly. He understood. He knew that some truths are more powerful than legal arguments. Samuel was quiet for a long time, and then a slow, strange smile spread across his face. It's cunning, he said, almost to himself. Veronica can't defend against it. She can't hire a lawyer to rebut a memory. Only Eleanor remained unconvinced, but she saw that the rest of us were united. She sighed, a long, frustrated sound. Fine, she conceded. Fine, we wait. You write your letter, but when it does nothing, we do this my way, I nodded. It was a fair compromise. That night, after everyone had gone, Jessica brought me a single sheet of her finest cream-colored stationery and a simple black pen. I sat at the dining table, the same table where my war council had met. I placed the photograph of my 5 children on the porch steps beside the paper. I looked at David's small, innocent face one last time. Then I uncapped the pen, took a breath that felt like it was drawn from the very bottom of my soul, and began to write. My dearest David. The ink from the pen felt unnaturally dark against the creamy white of the paper. As I wrote, it was as if the words were not merely being written, but were being drawn from the deepest well of my memory, each one carrying the weight of the years it represented. I did not write in a fury, nor in a flood of sorrow. I wrote with the slow, deliberate precision of a watchmaker, assembling the delicate, intricate machinery of a life, a family, a home. My dearest David, I wrote. The pen I am holding is a simple one, but the one you gave me last week was quite heavy. I remember thinking that as I held it. It felt important. I had no idea, of course, how right I was. I am writing to you from Benjamin's guest room. The wallpaper has little blue flowers on it. It is very peaceful, but it is not home. Last night, I woke up reaching for the glass of water I have kept on my bedside table for 30 years, and my hand met only empty air. It is a small thing, a silly thing, but it is in these small things that a life is lived, isn't it? You were 7 years old when you finally grew taller than the little notch your father had penciled on the kitchen door frame the year before. You were so proud you demanded we measure you every morning for a week. Your father, laughing, would make a great show of it, and I would make you your favorite oatmeal with extra brown sugar. That door frame is a map of our family's heart, David. Benjamin's scraped knee at age 6. Eleanor's triumphant mark when she was finally tall enough to reach the cookie jar, your own proud line. The man who came to my door with the papers. I wonder if he will tell the new owners not to paint over that door frame. I wonder if he would even know what to look for. Do you remember thunderstorms? When you were little, you were certain the thunder was an angry giant who lived in the clouds. The first rumble would send you flying down the hall and into our bed. You would burrow under the covers, a trembling little lump, and Arthur would pretend to shout at the giant to leave his son alone, while I would hold you and hum the lullaby my own mother sang to me. The one about the little boat sailing home to the harbor. I can still feel the frantic beat of your little heart against my ribs. I was your harbor, my son. I was the place you came to when the world was loud and frightening. When you were 17, you wanted to go on a summer trip to Europe with your friends. A trip we could not afford. Your father's business had a difficult year, and every penny was accounted for. You did not know this, but I took the pearl necklace my mother left me. the one I wore on my wedding day, and I sold it. It was enough for your plane ticket and your spending money. Seeing the look on your face when we gave you that ticket, watching you see the world for the first time, it was worth more than 1,000 necklaces. That house was built on small sacrifices like that, David. It was held together not by nails, but by the choices we made, the pieces of ourselves we gave, to build a future for our children. I was never prouder than the day you graduated from business school. I remember the scratchy wool of your gown, the weight of the rolled-up diploma in your hand. Your father was there, standing at the back, too overwhelmed with emotion to speak. He just watched you, his son, the first in our family to get such a degree, and I saw a look in his eyes I will never forget. It was a look of completion, a look that said the hard years, the long hours, the sold necklace. It had all been worth it. He believed he had given you a foundation on which you could build anything, and so, my dear son, I sit here in this quiet, peaceful room, and I cannot reconcile the man I remember with the man who stood in my living room last week. I cannot understand how the boy who needed me to protect him from a storm could orchestrate one so devastating. I cannot fathom how the man whose future was bought with a string of pearls could place a cold, silver pen in his mother's hand and ask her to sign away the very home those pearls paid for. The man I raised, the man my Arthur was so proud of, would never have stood silently while his wife called his family home a rotting asset. He would never have turned his back on his mother, his siblings, in their moment of greatest pain. This is not a letter asking for my house back. The house is made of wood and plaster. It can be bought and sold. This letter is about the foundation your father and I gave you. A foundation of love, sacrifice, and trust. You have allowed Veronica to bulldoze the house, but it is the foundation I am worried about. Is there anything left of it? Is there even a single stone of the boy I raised left inside the man you have become? That is a question only you can answer. Your lawyers will not help you with it. Veronica's ambition will not shield you from it. My love even now cannot erase it. It is your question to live with. I pray you find an answer you can bear. Your mother. I folded the letter, my hands steady. I placed it in an envelope and wrote his name on the front. Not his and Veronica's, just his. I did not feel catharsis or anger or even sadness. I felt a profound and quiet sense of purpose. I had fired my only shot. Not a cannonball of rage, but a single, well-aimed bullet of memory, aimed directly at the heart of the little boy who was afraid of thunderstorms. The next morning, I gave the letter to Benjamin to mail. Eleanor called, as she always did, and I told her what I had done. You sent it, she said, her voice flat. Well, that's that then. We've lost our chance to get ahead of them. Perhaps, I said, or perhaps we have just begun a different kind of fight. Now there was nothing left to do. The matriarch had made her move on the board. All we could do was wait and see if the pawn, the prince, or the king would respond. The silence that followed the mailing of the letter was the loudest I have ever known. Every day was a vigil. The ringing of the telephone would cause a house-wide flinch. Jessica would answer, her voice cautiously hopeful, and we would all watch her face, trying to read the news before she spoke. It was never him. It was Eleanor asking for an update. It was a friend from my garden club, unaware of the tectonic shift that had occurred in my life. The world kept spinning, oblivious to the fact that ours had stopped. Life at Benjamin and Jessica's fell into a strange rhythm, a routine built on the foundation of waiting. Benjamin would set up a canvas for me in the garden, hoping the familiar pull of a paintbrush might offer a temporary truce from my thoughts. Jessica would bake, filling the house with the comforting sense of apple and cinnamon, a fragrant shield against the encroaching despair. They were my devoted guardians, trying to protect me from the crushing weight of the silence. But the silence was a living thing. It was in the sympathetic, questioning looks from their neighbors. It was in the careful way my other children would speak to me on the phone, their voices unnaturally gentle, as if I were a piece of porcelain that might shatter at the slightest vibration. Eleanor's patience, predictably, was the first casualty. "It's been 10 days, Mother," she said, her voice tight with frustration during her nightly call. A letter takes 1, maybe 2 days to arrive. He has read it by now. His silence is his answer. He's chosen her. We are losing valuable time. I found myself defending my decision, my voice weaker than I wanted it to be. A wound of this nature does not heal or fester overnight, Eleanor. We must give it time. Time is what Veronica is using against us, she retorted. She is probably at the bank right now, leveraging the house to fund her next dozen schemes. We are being fools. Her words were a poison of doubt that seeped into my resolve. In the deep, lonely hours of the night, I would lie awake in the unfamiliar guest room and wonder if she was right. Had I mistaken a mother's desperate hope for a viable strategy? Had I sent a prayer into a hurricane expecting it to be heard? The first response, when it came, was not a phone call, but a crisp, white envelope in the mail. It was not addressed in David's hand. It was typed, formal, and addressed to me, care of Benjamin and Jessica. My heart hammered against my ribs as Benjamin handed it to me. Inside was a single sheet of heavy legal letterhead. The name at the top was that of Mr. Albright, Veronica's hawk-eyed lawyer. The letter was short and brutal. It stated that I was to cease and desist any and all direct communication with his client, Mr. David, and by extension, his wife, Veronica. It accused me of emotional manipulation and harassment in an attempt to subvert a legally binding contract. It concluded by stating that any future correspondence must be directed to his office. It was a slap in the face. A door slammed shut and bolted from the other side. Veronica had not only intercepted my letter, she had weaponized it, turning my words of memory and love into a legal accusation against me. When Eleanor heard, she was incandescent with a righteous, furious energy. "That's it," she declared over the phone, her voice so loud I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. "This is a declaration of war. She's threatening you now, Mother. I am calling Richard. We are filing. The time for your sentimental games is over." This time I had no argument. Benjamin sat beside me, his face pale, his artist's soul utterly defeated by such calculated cruelty. Jessica wordlessly began to make a pot of tea, her own quiet way of processing a shock. The legal letter lay on the table between us, a white flag of my surrender. I had played my move, and my opponent had countered with overwhelming, dismissive force. I had lost. But 2 days later, a second, far quieter signal arrived. It came from Samuel. He called in the late afternoon, his voice strangely hesitant. "Mary," he said, forgoing his usual pleasantries. "A strange thing happened." "I had a lunch meeting with Bob Peterson from the investment firm. You remember him?" "Vaguely, dear," I said, my mind still shrouded in defeat. Well, David was supposed to be there. It was a big meeting, a deal he and Veronica have been trying to land for months. A real make-or-break moment for their new company. He paused. David never showed up. No call, no email. Just didn't show. Peterson was furious. Said it was the most unprofessional thing he'd seen in years. Said Veronica called him an hour later, making all sorts of excuses about a sudden illness. But the damage was done. They lost the deal. I sat up a little straighter. "He didn't show up?" "That's not all," Samuel continued, his voice dropping lower. Peterson said he saw David in the parking garage later. He said he looked awful, like he hadn't slept in a week. Said his suit was rumpled and he just sat in his car, staring at the steering wheel. Peterson tried to talk to him and David just drove off fast. After I hung up the phone, the world felt different. The legal letter from Veronica was a fortress wall, high and imposing. But Samuel's news was the sound of a stone crumbling from within that wall. David was not fine. He was not standing united with his wife in their victory. He was a man coming undone. My letter had not been dismissed. It had detonated. Veronica's legal threat was not a power move. It was a desperate attempt to contain the blast, to isolate the victim of the fallout, her own husband. That evening, when Eleanor called, ready to give the final marching orders to her lawyer, I had my answer. "No," I said, and this time my voice was firm, resonant with a newfound resolve. "We are not filing. Not yet. Mother, after that letter? How can you possibly say that?" "Because that letter was not from David," I explained. "It was from Veronica. It was an act of fear, not of strength. My letter is not a dead thing, Eleanor. It is a seed, and it has taken root. We cannot see the growth yet, but I know it is happening in the dark." I could almost hear her shaking her head in disbelief. "And what are we supposed to do?" "Just wait for this magical beanstalk to grow." "We wait for him to break," I said, the words tasting of both sorrow and strategy. "Veronica wants a war with all of us. It would unite them, David and her, against the family. But right now my letter is a war inside of him. And in that war, she is his enemy, not his ally. We must let that battle play out." I had placed my son on a spiritual sickbed. All I could do now was wait for the fever to break. The weeks that followed were a lesson in the peculiar torment of a quiet war. My days were marked not by events, but by the slow, agonizing drip of second-hand news, each drop eroding the fortress Veronica had tried to build around my son. My letter was not a bomb that had exploded. It was a slow-acting poison, and I was now forced to watch, from a helpless distance, as it did its work. The summer deepened, the air growing thick and heavy, mirroring the atmosphere in our borrowed home. The news came in fragments passed along a reluctant family grapevine. Samuel would call, his voice a strange mix of grim satisfaction and familial duty. "Another one of their investors pulled out today," he'd report. "The word is out. Nobody trusts them anymore. David's name is mud in the financial district." Eleanor, unable to resist, had her lawyer do some quiet digging. "She's taken out a second mortgage on the house, Mother," she announced one afternoon, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "A high-interest, short-term loan. They're desperate. They're bleeding money. My God, the stupidity. She won a battle but is losing the entire war." For Eleanor, this was justice in its purest form, a spreadsheet of failure, a ledger of consequence. But these were just reports of a crumbling business. They were abstract, distant. The true cost of my letter, the human toll, was delivered to me by my granddaughter, Emily. She arrived late one evening, her face pale, her usual bright eyes shadowed with a profound sadness. She had been at a 24-hour pharmacy, picking up medicine for a headache. As she was leaving, she told me, she saw a man slumped over the steering wheel of a car in the dimly lit parking lot. The car was expensive, but it was filthy, covered in a film of dust and grime. Something made her stop. She thought perhaps the man was ill. She tapped gently on the window. The man looked up and her heart fell. It was her Uncle David. "He looked like a ghost, Grandma," she whispered, her hands trembling as she recounted the story. "He was so thin and he hadn't shaved. His eyes, they were just empty." She said he stared at her for a long moment, his expression confused, as if he were looking at a stranger. "Are you all right, Uncle David?" she had asked him, her voice small. He didn't seem to hear her. He just shook his head slowly and muttered something, his voice thick and hoarse. "What did he say?" I asked, my own voice a whisper. Emily's eyes filled with tears. "He said the paper was just for the party. He just kept repeating it." She said the paper was just for the party. He was haunted. My words, my memory, had become a ghost that sat beside him in the car, a phantom he could not escape. Emily said that he finally seemed to recognize her, and a look of such profound, gut-wrenching shame washed over his face that she had to look away. Without a word, he started the car and sped out of the parking lot, leaving her standing alone under the flickering fluorescent lights. Hearing this was a unique and terrible agony. The strategist in me, the matriarch who had chosen her weapon, knew the plan was working. The letter had bypassed Veronica's legal walls and had begun its siege on David's conscience. But the mother in me, the mother was heartbroken. I had wanted to reclaim my son's soul, but I had not fully understood how violent an exorcism can be. My victory felt sickeningly like watching my own child bleed. The dilemma of grace and justice had become a torment. I was achieving a brutal form of justice, and it was utterly devoid of grace. The days after Emily's story were the worst. The silence from David's end was no longer a question. It was the sound of a man drowning. We were all just waiting for the body to surface. The end of the waiting came on a Wednesday, nearly a month after I had sent the letter. The rain was torrential, beating against the windows, a pathetic fallacy so perfect it felt like a scene from a play. We had just finished a quiet dinner when the phone rang, its shrill cry cutting through the sound of the storm. We all froze. It was after 10 o'clock. No one called this late unless it was an emergency. With a trembling hand, I picked up the receiver. "Hello?" There was silence on the other end, but it was not an empty silence. It was filled with a ragged, painful breathing. I could hear the distant sound of clinking glasses and muted music, like a bar or a restaurant. "Hello?" I repeated, my heart beginning to pound. Then a voice I barely recognized, a thing of ruin, stripped of all its charm and confidence, sanded down to a raw, desperate nub of pain, a voice that sounded like it was being torn from the very roots of a man's soul. It was my son, and he said only one word, "Mama." The connection went dead, but the word remained, hanging in the air, in the room, in my heart. It was not a conversation. It was a surrender. It was the sound of a lifetime of pride and greed and deception collapsing under the weight of a single memory. The fever had finally broken. The single word, "Mama," echoed in the silent room long after the line had gone dead. It was a word that held a lifetime within it, a confession, a plea, a complete and utter surrender. The storm raged outside, but inside, a different kind of storm had just broken. Eleanor was the first to speak, her voice sharp with suspicion. "It's a trick, a ploy for sympathy. He's with Veronica, and they've realized their little scheme is failing, so now he's trying to play on your emotions, Mother." "Don't fall for it. Did you hear him, Eleanor?" Benjamin asked, his own voice thick with a pained hope. "That wasn't a trick. That was the sound of a man at the very end of his rope." They all looked at me, their faces illuminated by the soft light of a single lamp. They were waiting for their queen's command. "Do we raise the shields or do we lower the drawbridge?" "He is broken," I said, my voice quiet but certain. "My letter was a mirror, and he has finally been forced to look into it. A man in that much pain is not laying a trap. He is looking for a harbor." I thought of the lullaby I had written about in my letter. He was the little boat, lost in a storm of his own making, searching for home. For hours we sat in a state of suspended animation. Eleanor, despite her skepticism, was on her laptop trying to trace the call. Benjamin paced the floor. Jessica refilled my teacup, her presence a silent, steady comfort. Every gust of wind, every rattle of the window pane, sounded like a footstep on the porch. And then, near midnight, it came. A sound different from the storm. A soft, hesitant knocking at the front door. We all froze. Benjamin moved to the door, looking back at me for permission. I gave a slow, deliberate nod. He unlatched the lock and opened the door, and there he was, my son. The man standing on the doorstep was a stranger wearing David's face. He was soaked to the bone, his expensive suit clinging to a frame that was at least 20 pounds lighter. His hair was matted to his head, and his face was a pale, unshaven mask of pure despair. He did not look at Benjamin. He did not look at any of us. His eyes, hollowed out and haunted, found mine across the room. He took one stumbling step into the house, and then his legs gave out. He collapsed onto the floor in the entryway, not with a thud, but with a slow, boneless folding, like a puppet whose strings had been severed. And he began to sob, not the quiet tears of regret, but the great, shuddering, body-racking sobs of a soul that has been completely and utterly shattered. We all rushed to him. It was a surreal and pitiful scene. My children and I surrounding the brother who had betrayed us, who now lay weeping on the floor like a lost child. It took a long time for the storm inside of him to pass. When he could finally speak, the story came out in a torrent of broken sentences and painful confessions. The letter had been, as I suspected, a seed. He had hidden it from Veronica, reading it over and over in secret. It haunted his days and stole his sleep. The memories I had recounted became ghosts at his table. He saw his father's proud face every time he looked in the mirror. He heard my lullaby in the dead of night. His world began to unravel. He couldn't focus at work. His guilt was a poison that made every success feel like a failure, every dollar feel like a stolen coin. Veronica, he said, had no patience for his grief. She saw it as weakness, a fatal flaw in the machinery of her ambition. When he lost the big deal, she had been merciless. She called him a sentimental fool, just like his mother. The final break came that evening. He had confessed to her that he couldn't bear the guilt any longer, that he thought they should give the house back. She had laughed in his face. She told him the house was hers, that his name was on nothing. She told him that if he was too weak to enjoy the spoils of their victory, he could leave. She had called him a mama's boy and thrown him out. With nowhere else to go, his pride and his greed finally extinguished, he had called the only harbor he had ever known. "I'll fix it, Mama," he wept, clutching at my hand. "I'll testify. I'll tell them everything I did, everything she planned. I'll sign whatever you want. They can send me to prison. I don't care. I deserve it. I couldn't bear it anymore." Here it was, the final dilemma, justice or grace. Eleanor was already looking at him with the cold eyes of a prosecutor. Benjamin's face was a canvas of pity. Samuel watched with a complex, unreadable expression. I knelt down, my old bones protesting so that I was level with my broken son. I looked into his ruined face. The little boy who was afraid of the storm has finally come home. I said softly. His sobs hitched and a flicker of hope entered his eyes. But I was not finished. But the man who stood in my house still has to answer for the storm he created. I offered him not a pardon, but a path. A hard path. You will not go to prison, I said, my voice firm. A prison sentence is an ending. I am offering you a beginning. You will work with Eleanor's lawyer. You will give him every piece of evidence you have. You will undo the legal knots you tied, and then you will spend the rest of your days working to rebuild the foundation you destroyed. Not with money, but with your actions. Trust is not given, David. It is earned, one day at a time. And so it was. David, armed with his testimony and inside knowledge of Veronica's tangled finances, became the key that unlocked our victory. Faced with certain legal defeat and accusations of fraud, Veronica was forced to sign the house back. She disappeared from our lives, a ghost consumed by her own greed, leaving behind a wake of legal battles and failed businesses. We got the house back. I stood in the living room, a place that had been the stage for my greatest joy and my deepest betrayal. But it was not the same. A memory, once tainted, can never be fully scrubbed clean. So I made one last decision. I sold the house. I gathered my children, all of them, including David, and I divided the proceeds. I set up a fund to support Benjamin's art, invested in Samuel's business, created a trust for my grandchildren, and to David I gave a small portion, enough for a simple apartment and a new start. My home was never the building. It was them, and by breaking it apart and giving it away, I was finally making it whole again. David's redemption is a quiet, ongoing story. He works a simple job. He is slowly, painstakingly rebuilding his relationship with his siblings. He has a long way to go. But some nights, when the rain is beating against the windows, he calls me, just to hear my voice. And I know the harbor is still there for him. My dear friend, thank you for walking with me through this painful memory. It is in sharing these stories that we find their meaning, and perhaps a measure of peace. If my story has touched you, I would be so grateful if you would press the like button and subscribe to my little channel of memories. It helps these tales find their way in the world. Please leave a comment below and tell me what you thought of this chapter in our family's life. And most importantly, help me decide which path to walk down next. Whose story should we uncover? The quiet, unshakable loyalty of my daughter-in-law, Jessica? The lifelong burden of my daughter, Eleanor, who feels she must control everything to keep it from falling apart? Or the complicated envy and surprising honor of my son, Samuel? Let me know. I have so many more stories to tell.